Howdy, folks. This here's a hype video for my new book. Allegorical Jesus, the hidden parable of divine humanity. Here's a close-up of the cover. This here book is available on Amazon Books as a paperback or as an ebook. In this book, I present valuable insights into how to understand the four Gospels and the book of Revelation spiritually. The book will serve as an introduction to the science of correspondence, which is a metaphysical and exegetical system which was introduced to humanity by a man named Emanuel Swedenborg. Now, if you're not familiar with Emanuel Swedenborg, you really ought to take the time to look him up. Howdy, folks. My name is David Higgins, and from that opening sequence, you can see that this video is not meant to be taken too seriously. It's simply meant to serve as an introduction to my new book, which is titled Allegorical Jesus, the hidden parable of divine humanity. This book is available on Amazon Books, either in paperback form or as an ebook. So obviously I'm talking about Jesus here, who was certainly an historical figure. There's constant speculation about Jesus, about who he really was, what his legacy means, and there's of course countless other books about Jesus available. If you've read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and the book of Revelation, you probably have been able to perceive that those books are highly unique. They have a unique aura and power. The power, if you haven't experienced it, on a personal level, is pretty undeniable if you look at history. Obviously Jesus changed the course of history, and his influence is as strong as ever. Countless people look at the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as, the purest truth ever written, and they believe that the Gospels were written by men who were inspired by God, and they contain a flawless account of God himself walking the earth 2,000 years ago. Besides the amazing deeds of Jesus, which we have recorded in those books, there's likewise his teaching, which is often quite jarring, hard to process. So there's a significant amount of debate that goes around these books, such as who were the authors, are the translations accurate, are other books that were written during the same time period equally significant or not. They submit these books to cultural and linguistic analysis, and basically countless attempts have been made to put Jesus in perspective. I want to tell you about a very unique approach that was given to us by Emanuel Swedenborg. So you really should take the time to look him up. He's a very interesting person, and he made a unique contribution to the collective intelligence about 250 years ago. He was a Swedish nobleman, politician, a scientist, and a mystic who published a large body of theological and metaphysical books for posterity. He said that his generation was not prepared to understand what he had to offer. He put the books into libraries and seminaries and universities across Europe, He was actually pretty widely read even in colonial America during his day, but then he's sort of fallen into obscurity. So anyway, Swedenborg's unique approach is to understand the books spiritually, and his spiritual approach manages to basically negate all of the controversy surrounding the literal text and historical Jesus, because he uses what he calls the science of correspondence to show that the scripture has distinct levels of meaning, and we can basically look through the natural level or the literal story and attain a completely distinct level of meaning, which he calls the spiritual level. So once we've been able to penetrate to that level of understanding, we can see that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and the book of Revelation are in fact a parable about our spiritual life. So his method is detailed, it's specific, and to my mind it is highly convincing. Jesus' life is basically a story portraying the roadmap of our spiritual journey as individuals and collectively. So to give you a short introduction to the science of correspondence, it's a metaphysical set of ideas which basically start from what Swedenborg calls the doctrine of degrees or levels. So metaphysically speaking, reality emanates from a single source called the divine, and it manifests in a stepwise successive manner on three different levels, which Swedenborg called the celestial level, the spiritual level, and the natural level. Human consciousness also has these levels, both individually and collectively. So Swedenborg also, I believe, was one of the first philosophers to introduce the idea of the collective consciousness, that there is a shared level of the mind. And in fact, in the science of correspondence, we are given to understand that the physical world that we experience with our five senses is actually a level of human consciousness. And in fact, the physical world has no existence apart from human consciousness. So this idea is related to the philosophical idea that was championed by George Berkeley called idealism. So the basis of the whole system is that reality is really nothing other than human consciousness. So this is a very abstract subject that Swedenborg develops extensively in his theological and metaphysical works. But so I've said that reality has three levels, the human mind has three levels, and similarly, sacred scripture, according to Swedenborg, has the same three levels: celestial, spiritual, and natural. According to the science of correspondence, one level emanates from the other in a manner which is distinct. There's a distinct sort of jump from one level to the other rather than a blending from one level to another. So to go from the literal level to the spiritual level requires one to shift one's thinking dramatically from the natural level of thinking to the spiritual level of thinking. And in my book, I spend quite a bit of time talking about the two different types of thinking, natural and spiritual. natural thinking is based in and around time and space and all of the concerns that confront us through time and space and our five senses. So everything that is personal is of the natural level, whereas the spiritual level is abstract, and it is framed by essential qualities such as goodness and truth and evil and falsity. So you can imagine that setting aside time and space in our awareness or thinking is quite challenging, but with a little bit of focus, it actually can be done, and it really goes a long way when we're trying to make sense out of the Gospels, the Book of Revelation, and even Swedenborg's works as well, because Swedenborg points out the distinction between natural truth and spiritual truth, but he often writes in a historical manner about Jesus, and when he's doing that, he's referring to the personhood of Jesus, but at the same time he doesn't exactly warn us that, okay, now I'm speaking naturally rather than spiritually. So I really make an effort to point out Swedenborg's mixed message. He speaks about God naturally for the naturally minded, and then he also speaks about God spiritually. And if we're not careful to be aware of the different levels of meaning within the Gospels and within Swedenborg's work, we can get confused and sort of lose our way rationally. So the books are worthwhile. The book is worthwhile, and it will open a new way of reading the Bible, and also it'll help people who've been reading Swedenborg to consider some important points that will keep you from getting distracted from any confusion that might arise if you're not careful in the manner in which you read Swedenborg. So besides this book, also available by the same author, yours truly, is this book called Emanuel Swedenborg, Foundation Principles. I give you a basic overview of Swedenborg's metaphysical system. I've also written a book about Christian psychology called Mystical Christian Metaphysical Psychology, How to Use Spiritual Psychology to Overcome Toxic Stress, Anxiety, and Depression. I wrote a book about the pandemic, the metaphysics of COVID-19, idealism, disease, and society. Swedenborg was a champion of the idea that all disease has a spiritual basis, and I elaborate on that concept in this book, which is very useful right now in attempting to process our current dilemma. And then my first book, which I wrote a couple of years ago, called The Spiritual Source of the Universe, The Demystification of Swedenborg's Metaphysics, is a brief discussion of the science of correspondence. So I hope you will take the time to find those books on Amazon Books and tune in to this channel for future episodes. Please like and subscribe, and please have a great day. All right, well, now I do realize that much of that opening sequence was pretty goofy, and that I'm a terrible actor, and that the whole clowning around thing maybe seems a bit out of context when we're discussing theology, because quite often religion, because the issues are essential. They're the foundation of our whole life. When we start discussing these ideas, we might tend to get overly serious and well, it's obviously a serious subject, but it's important to realize that what's most important is to remain peaceful and loving. And of course, as we struggle with all of the serious issues in life, we should be using religion to relieve the pressure, not increase it. So I'm hoping that as we move forward discussing these sorts of issues, we'll keep that in mind and keep it light if possible. Well, folks, I hope you'll kindly tune in for future episodes. Until next time, I wish you happy trails.